The battle that almost ended the British Empire in India. Mysore's 1761 Gambit. What if I told you that in 1761, a relatively unknown South Indian kingdom came within a hair's breadth of crushing the East India Company and rewriting the entire history of colonial India? While the world's attention was fixed on the carnage of the 7 Years' War raging across Europe, and while the British were still reeling from their catastrophic losses in North America, a tiger was stirring in the south of India. The Kingdom of Mysore, under the brilliant military mind of Hyder Ali, was about to teach the East India Company a lesson they would never forget, one that would haunt British nightmares for the next 4 decades. The chessboard of South India. Picture South India in 1761. A volatile powder keg of competing powers, each eyeing the others with equal parts suspicion and ambition. The once mighty Mughal Empire had crumbled into irrelevance. The Marathas dominated the west and center. The Nizam of Hyderabad controlled the Deccan Plateau, and nestled in the lush highlands of the western Ghats sat Mysore, a kingdom most Europeans had barely heard of. But here's where it gets interesting. While other Indian rulers were busy fighting each other or making disastrous deals with European trading companies, one man saw the game for what it really was. His name was Hyder Ali, and he was about to become the East India Company's worst nightmare. Hyder Ali wasn't born to rule. He was a military commander who had clawed his way up from modest origins through sheer brilliance, ruthlessness, and an uncanny ability to read the changing winds of power. By 1761, he had effectively seized control of Mysore from its Hindu royal family, though he kept them as figureheads, a clever move that gave him legitimacy while allowing him complete military freedom. And Hyder Ali understood something that would take the British Empire another century to fully grasp. Technology wins wars. The company's fatal arrogance. The East India Company in 1761 was drunk on its own success. Just 4 years earlier, at Plassey in Bengal, Robert Clive had defeated the Nawab of Bengal with an army that was outnumbered 17-1. The victory, achieved largely through bribery and betrayal, had convinced the British that Indian armies were pushover forces, disorganized rabbles that would scatter at the first volley of European musket fire. This arrogance would nearly destroy them. The company had been steadily expanding its influence from its base in Madras, modern-day Chennai, making alliances, breaking them, and generally behaving like the corporate overlords they were. They had allied with Muhammad Ali Khan Walaja, the Nawab of the Carnatic, in his endless power struggle against Chanda Sahib and the French. With French power in India shattered after their defeat in the 7 Years' War, the British felt invincible. Then Hyder Ali entered the picture, and everything changed. The tiger sharpens his claws. Here's what made Hyder Ali different from every other Indian ruler the British had faced. He learned from them. While other kingdoms clung to traditional cavalry charges and outdated tactics, Hyder Ali was modernizing his army at breakneck speed. He hired French officers to train his infantry in European drill. He established foundries to cast modern artillery. He studied European military manuals. He even began experimenting with Mysorean rockets, an innovation that would later inspire the British Congreve rocket and ultimately modern rocketry itself. But his real genius was strategic. Hyder Ali understood that the East India Company's strength came from their coastal strongholds and their naval superiority. Cut them off from the sea, disrupt their supply lines, and suddenly those red-coated sepoys weren't so formidable anymore. By 1761, tensions between Mysore and the company had reached a breaking point. The British, in their infinite wisdom, had decided to support Mysore's enemies and had been making threatening moves toward Hyder Ali's territory. They assumed he would back down, as so many other Indian rulers had done before. They assumed wrong. The storm breaks. When war finally erupted, it didn't start with a bang. It started with a whisper of hoofbeats in the night and villages burning in the dawn. Hyder Ali's opening move was masterful. Instead of attacking the heavily fortified British positions head-on, he unleashed his cavalry across the Carnatic plains in a devastating campaign of what we'd now call asymmetric warfare. His horsemen moved like smoke, appearing from nowhere, devastating supply convoys, cutting communication lines, and vanishing before British reinforcements could arrive. The British quickly discovered that fighting Hyder Ali was nothing like their previous experiences in India. His infantry stood firm under fire. His artillery was as good as theirs, sometimes better. His cavalry was everywhere and nowhere. And most terrifying of all, he seemed to anticipate their every move. Colonel Joseph Smith, commanding the British forces, found himself in an impossible situation. Every time he marched his army out to engage Hyder Ali, the Mysorean forces would melt away, only to reappear behind him, threatening his supply lines and his retreat back to Madras. When Smith tried to dig in and wait for reinforcements, Hyder Ali's forces would devastate the surrounding countryside, cutting off food and fodder. It was a masterclass in guerrilla warfare, executed a century before the term even existed. The siege that never was. The climax of the 1761 campaign came when Hyder Ali made a move so audacious that British officers literally couldn't believe the reports. He marched his entire army right up to the gates of Madras itself. Imagine the scene. Madras, the crown jewel of British power in South India, suddenly found itself staring down the barrels of Mysorean artillery. Inside the fort, panic reigned. The British had never imagined an Indian army could project power this far, this effectively. Their sepoy troops were exhausted from months of fruitless campaigning. Their European reinforcements were thousands of miles away across hostile seas. Their supplies were running dangerously low. Hyder Ali could have taken the city. Many historians believe he could have ended British power in South India right then and there. But here's where the story takes a fascinating turn. He chose not to. Why? Because Hyder Ali was playing a longer game. He didn't want to conquer British territory. He wanted them out of South Indian politics. He wanted recognition as an equal power. He wanted them to stop interfering in his campaigns against his real enemies, the Marathas and the Nizam of Hyderabad. The treaty that changed nothing and everything. Under the walls of Madras, with a gun metaphorically pressed to their head, the East India Company agreed to the Treaty of 1761. The terms were simple: mutual restoration of conquests and a defensive alliance. On paper, it looked like a compromise. In reality, it was a humiliation. The mighty East India Company had been forced to negotiate as equals with an Indian power. The treaty's significance rippled far beyond its immediate terms. In the courts of Indian rulers from Delhi to Travancore, whispers spread: Hyder Ali had defeated the British. He had marched on Madras and forced them to terms. The myth of European invincibility lay shattered in the dust of the Carnatic plains. For the British, the 1761 war was a wake-up call they desperately didn't want to answer. They tried to downplay it, to spin it as a tactical withdrawal or a strategic peace. But the truth was undeniable. Hyder Ali had outgeneraled them, outfought them, and forced them to bend the knee. The legacy of a forgotten war. Here's the cruel irony of history. Most people have never heard of the 1761 Mysore Company War. It's overshadowed by later, larger conflicts. The Anglo-Mysore wars that would follow in the 1760s through 1799. But this first encounter set everything in motion. The British learned from their defeat. They modernized their own armies, recruited more aggressively, and most importantly, they never again underestimated Indian military capabilities. When they fought Hyder Ali's son, Tipu Sultan, in subsequent wars, they came prepared for a peer competitor, not a primitive rabble. But Hyder Ali also planted the seeds of something profound. The idea that European powers could be beaten, or that modernization and military innovation weren't European monopolies that Indian kingdoms could compete on equal terms if they were willing to adapt and evolve. What if Hyder Ali had pushed harder in 1761? What if he had taken Madras? It's one of history's great counterfactuals. The British Empire in India might have ended before it truly began. Indian history might have followed a radically different path. The Industrial Revolution's relationship with colonialism might have evolved entirely differently. Instead, the Tiger of Mysore showed his claws, but held back the killing blow. And the British, wounded and humiliated, would spend the next 4 decades plotting their revenge. A revenge that would eventually come at a terrible cost, but only after Hyder Ali and his son Tipu Sultan had proven again and again that the conquest of India was never the cakewalk that history books sometimes suggest. The 1761 war was a glimpse of what might have been, an India that could stand equal to European powers, that could adapt and modernize on its own terms, that could forge its own destiny in the age of empires. That dream would die with Tipu Sultan in 1799. But for one brief, shining moment in 1761, it seemed almost possible.